Right. Well, everyone, welcome to another OpenChain webinar. This one is part of a series collecting presentations from an event we held in Stuttgart in April. So the event in April was OpenChain and Friends, and it was 3 days in total. The third day was workshops. The first 2 days were more presentation, panel style things. And during that period, we had talks about everything from how people can do automation, how small businesses can access the type of resources big businesses have, and of course, some technical deep dives of the practical side of things. Now, we're doing a series of webinars over the next 2 to 3 months, essentially recollecting those presentations, getting some of those presentations recorded and online for people who couldn't come to Stuttgart, and also to give people a taste of what will happen next year as we hold the event in Germany again. Now, our first presentation is quite exciting. It's going to be a case study, and it's a case study of how to use a certain automation, how this organization did things with automation. And that's actually one of the most requested things in the open source management community. People see things like open source tools for open source compliance, and they say, that looks great, but I'm feeling a little nervous about how to do it. How do you do it? Well, that's sort of what we're going to look at today. And we're going to be looking at it through the optics of the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. For those of you who know OpenChain well, you'll have noticed that in the last few months, the Erlang ecosystem has had adoption of our ISO standards for process management. This is a great example of how things for what appear to be the commercial supply chain can also work for projects. Now, we've seen that before. Eclipse Foundation is using our ISO standards, Open Euler ecosystem in China. The really cool thing, though, isn't just people pick up our standards, it's that they share more and more information about the cool things they're doing with governance. And what we have today, First Steps with ORT, the Open Source Review Toolkit, is about how the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation began to work with open source automation for open source compliance management. In other words, exactly the sort of stuff that we want to hear about in the community. Before we start, we have our usual note that this presentation, this webinar, is under the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. You can find the full policy on the LF website. And before I hand over, I just wanted to flag our presenter. Who is this person that's going to talk to us today? Well, Kiko's with Ericsson, and that's the organization where Erlang originated a long, long time ago. He has quite a bit of experience in the field, including, I've noticed, some pretty intense work during his PhD, developing optimizations for programming languages. Long story short, he knows what he's doing, and we're very lucky to have him here today. Without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start sharing the screen, and let's see if we can get things running. Do you see now the slides for the presentation?
It's perfect. Yes.
Perfect. So the title of this talk is First Steps with OS Review Toolkit and Erlang Ecosystem Foundation Experience Report. And I'm going to be referring to ORT, or OS Review Toolkit, interchangeably. Sometimes it's easier to say one than the other. So yeah, just wanted to say that. But none of this would be really possible. And people usually give credit to the tools and so on at the end. I'm going to do it at the beginning, because I think without them, we couldn't have done all the things that we're going to see in this presentation. So I would like to thank the people from the OS Review Toolkit scan code toolkit, reuse, and OSB, so the vulnerability database. Now, let's start. And we're going to start with a bit of context about Erlang in case people are not too familiar with this language. Once upon a time, in 1985, there was a kingdom that wanted to improve network communications. And that kingdom was Ericsson. Now, Ericsson developed new techniques and tools to become leader in network communications. And one of those tools developed closed-sourced initially between 1985 to 1998 was Erlang OTP. Erlang OTP is a programming and set of programming languages that come bundled together. And Erlang then is a concurrent programming language, distributed and fault-tolerant. All of this comes baked in, and it was thought to be like that. So why concurrent? Well, because Ericsson developed network switches, and a network switch must handle thousands of calls, so it needs to be concurrent. Why distributed? Well, because you want to be able to place calls, just not on your local area, right? So farther away. And why fault tolerant? Well, if a network switch must handle thousands of calls, if one of them fails, you don't want that failure to propagate to all the other calls, so it must be fault tolerant. Now, something really interesting happened in 1998. Erlang was started to be more and more used in Ericsson, but some sections within Ericsson were not willing to bet on Erlang. And the reason internally was that these sections wanted to bet on open source technology, so something that is on the public and not simply maintained by Ericsson, something that is community maintained. Based on multiple conversations and so on, this led in 1998 to Ericsson open sourcing the Erlang OTP programming language. As soon as they did that, Erlang started to be spread around across the world. In no particular order of when things started, but just picking up companies. Erlang is using Klarna Bank and Kibra, which is more specific to Sweden, I think. WhatsApp, academia, so in this case, A Coruña University. We have universities in Germany, France, Sweden, and so on, developing different things for Erlang. Meta, Cisco, Rakuten, and many, many other companies. Great. So what this means is that what started as an Ericsson product that was just living basically in the Swedish forest with no mountains, because we don't have mountains in Sweden, spread around. And suddenly we have giants, right, using and trying to pull Erlang into different directions. But not only Erlang, there are also new programming languages that run on top of the Erlang virtual machine, commonly known as Beam. So what happens then? If everyone tries to pull things on their own direction, this is going to be chaos, right? So the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation was born to cater for the whole ecosystem, to make sure that there's a Beam ecosystem that is healthy. Now, not too long ago, more and more people started to look into the Cyber Resilience Act. And as such, of course, the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation wanted to see how can we recommend, I guess, some tools to the community so that not every single project has to reinvent the wheel. The Cyber Resilience Act, from a really high overview, can be seen as a map. It tells you things you need to do, but not exactly how you do them. So it's about cybersecurity. It tells you that there are rules to ensure the cybersecurity of products with digital elements, that things need to be secure by default. You need to identify and document vulnerabilities, create a bill of materials, do your license compliance. You need to apply regular tests, reviews, and whatnot, right? All of this is fine. For the part that involves this presentation, which is in the context of the OS Review Toolkit, We're going to be focusing the CRA only on these specific parts that I'm going to show, because the CRA is way bigger than this. Licenses and copyrights for all of the contributors. And in case of Erlang OTP, specifically, Erlang OTP also vendor libraries. That means that there are some libraries like PCRE2 that are taken out of the PCRE repository and placed inside the Erlang OTP. And then we do modifications to the C part so that when you call an Erlang module, you don't need to see exactly how things work internally. So we do all the integration for you. The things that we're going to do with ORT, or OS Review Toolkit, is the compliance and the vulnerability and the creation of a report for Erlang and Elixir and Gleam. We haven't done it yet, but it's coming. In this case, we're going to show how we were able to analyze more than 11,000 files that make up the Erlang OTP repository and more than 1,000 files that make up the Elixir repository. So, first step using ORT in Erlang OTP. As I mentioned, we have 11,000 files, and in Erlang OTP as well, vendor libraries. Fine. What did we have in 2024? We had a single file, and all of this is open source, so you can go and check it back in history, in the folder system named copyrights. It has 1,000 lines, no more, 1,000 lines. And that file is going to cater for 11,000 files. Are we at this point fully sure that we are compliant with all licenses? I don't think so, to be honest. We know that some of the vendor licenses, right, we wrote into this file, but did we go through each of those single files to make sure that there's no other license? No, we didn't do that at the time, right? So let's see then the journey to be able to analyze these 11,000 files and see if we are really compliant with those licenses. We're going to use OS Review Toolkit, and we're going to go through the different phases. So how do we know if we're compliant with the licenses and we do our vulnerability scanning and so on? Well, we need to get the dependencies of the Erlang OTP project. We need to be able to download them so that we can scan the source code, right? And make sure that everything is according to what we expect. The good thing about the OS Review Toolkit is that the scanner has or is already integrated with scan code. And Erlang OTP previously used scan code with a customized script to do some of the license compliance, but it was not really working well. So that's why we thought maybe a bit of a more automation tool is a good thing. After you have all the licenses and so on, you can run the vulnerability scanner. Great. You can write your own custom-based license compliance using a domain-specific language in Kotlin that ORT provides. And finally, you can create a report. All of this sounds really good. The thing is, how many of these things worked for Erlang OTP out of the box? Not too many, let's say that, right? But we're going to see how we could really fix them. So let's start first with the analyzer. OS Review Toolkit usually relies on having or being integrated with the package manager. So they have integrations for pip in Python and for any other package managers commonly used. Now, in the Erlang OTP project, we don't have a package manager and we don't have external dependencies that we need to be able to build Erlang OTP. So because of that, right, ORT is not going to be able to download those dependencies, but that's mostly fine because our dependencies are the ones that we vendor. And because we vendor those dependencies, there is one good thing and one bad thing. The good thing is that if we're going to do the license compliance, so we're going to go through the files and analyze that we comply with the licenses, then that's fine, because our dependencies are included in the repo. So we get that basically for free. What is not so straightforward is to do the vulnerability scanning of basically vendor dependencies, because you just took a project from somewhere else, you place it into the Erlang OTP repo, and now somehow you need to, when you do your vulnerability scanning, you need to be able to say, yeah, I was using this kind of version and so on. So then the license compliance part was okay, but the vulnerability scanning, not so much. And because of that, we're going to get back to it later. So that's why I marked it with a yellow mark. What kind of issues did we find in the scanner? Well, in the scanner by default, files without a license were ignored. And that's maybe a good default behavior. In our case, Erlang has been, well, it was created in 1985, and now we're in 2025. So it's been 40 years, right? And that means that, yeah, we do have sometimes files that maybe have a license somewhere, right? And maybe we'd like to be able to identify those instead of ignoring them. So in Erlang OTP, we have more than 2,000 examples, tests, and documentation that maybe have a file called license in the folder, and that applies to the whole thing, right? Or sometimes maybe not even that. And we don't want to ignore those. What we want to do is actually to know about them so that we can fix them, right? So the thing that we had to do in this case was to talk to the OS Review Toolkit people, really nice people. And we said if it would be possible for us to create or add a flag to ORT to scan undetected or files that have no license. They thought that was okay, so we contributed with this to the ORT project. And now we're able to detect all those files. Because we're able to detect those files, some of the licenses detected were false positive, so there was some kind of mistake. That's really not a big issue in this case because ORT has a curation mechanism that allows you to say, well, in this file, I know you detected X license, but it's actually Y. And you just do that for the files that you know that are mistaken. So that was actually a good thing. The only thing is that ORT relies on the scan code to run the analysis. To run the analysis in 11,000 files, that was taking 2 hours of scanning time. If you don't do this too often, maybe that's fine, but we wanted to do all of it on every single pull request because we want to be able to see if there's any kind of code that comes in that is maybe vulnerable when we come to that part, right? And that we're not going to introduce a license that we don't accept. So because of that, I'm going to mark the scanner as yellowish because it takes 2 hours of time and we definitely cannot deal with that. Let's move on now to the evaluator part and see how we're going to fix the evaluator together with the scanner. In the evaluator, right, the main thing is that, well, in Erlang OTP, we had some kind of compliance automation based on the scan code, producing some JSON file, and then running our own custom script. It was not really working well. So just by using the mechanism from OS Review Toolkit, that was actually really nice and really simple to write automated license compliance. We're going to see an example when we talk about how we do it for Elixir, but in the Erlang OTP, I'm going to skip that example. We still have the issue of 2 hours of scanning time. And to fix that, well, we created a pull request Lucas created a pull request. Lucas is from the Erlang OTP team that says that instead of relying on the scan code custom script that we have, we're going to do it in ORT. And the problem is that ORT does a rescan and it takes more than 1 hour. It was actually 2 hours. And that's not acceptable, right? So we're going to introduce a change so that we can create a cache of the scan result files so that we can speed things up. Based on this, what used to take 2 hours now takes, I think, 3 to 5 minutes to scan the whole thing. So that was actually a really good thing. So based on that, we have solved the evaluator and also the scanning time. The only thing missing is the report. For Erlang OTP, we simply create SPDX SBOM. Now, what happened with the report? By default, ORT was not generating a source SBOM for a project without a package manager. So we took again back to the OS review toolkit, and we thought that our case probably is not the only one where maybe they don't have integration with a package manager, and people could benefit quite a lot from using ORT. But there needs to be a way, right, to be able to create a SPDX or an SBOM report. So we created a pull request that they accepted, and that's how now we can generate SPDX reports for projects that don't have a package manager integrated into ORT. Sure enough, there are some things that cannot be fixed because we don't have the integration of a package manager. The output that you're going to get is a source SBOM that contains a single package with all of the files. But this source SBOM is a JSON file. So we can just mangle a bit the JSON file to create a really nice output for the users or consumers of Erlang OTP. So we just created a pull request to the Erlang OTP repository and fixed that. Based on that, we have fixed also the SPDX SBOM. The only thing left is the analyzer. So how to do vulnerability scanning for vendor dependencies. There are different ways to go about this. We knew that the US Review Toolkit has an open issue that they want to be able to accept SPDX SBOMs as first-class input. This requires quite a lot of work because the SBOM that they need to accept needs to be of good enough quality, right? So it's not like they can immediately create something easy that they only accept SBOMs created with ORT, right? So it's a bit of a tricky issue. So what we did instead is, well, we already have the SBOM. We have the package URLs for the vendor dependencies and so on. So let's just basically create our own custom script and check the vendor libraries for vulnerabilities using the OSV vulnerability database. To do that, we perform vulnerability scanning on a per pull request basis. And if there's a CVE found in the pull request, then of course that test fails. So we notice that immediately. But Erlang OTP maintains the last 3 releases of the language. So basically that means the last 3 years of the language. And that means that we need to do vulnerability scanning and fan out or branch out and check. We're now in OTP 28, so we need to check OTP 26, 27, and 28. So we need to check those for vulnerabilities. If we are to find some vulnerability, what we're going to do is we're going to create a Sarif file and upload that to GitHub, such that it's easy for Erlang OTP to go into the security part of GitHub and see if mark those as false positives or not. We're studying how to do the VEX generation for these things, but we don't want to have to create everything manually, because if suddenly there's a bunch of CVEs for vendor libraries, you need to write all of that information. So we're studying how to do this in an easy way. In any case, based on all of this, now we can make sure we know that we're compliant with the licenses because we wrote our own license compliance rules. We do the vulnerability scanning, and we create a SPDX SBOM that we can pass to anyone that wants to use Erlang OTP. We're going to go through the pipeline of GitHub to understand how do we make sure that we get the right licenses? Because we don't do it completely straightforward. We have a bit of a custom script to be able to fetch the cache and so on. So in every pull request, we run the ORT analysis, and this creates an analysis JSON file. And after that, we check if there's some scan results available in the cache. If there are not, then we just need to run the ORT scanner. And this internally will call scan code, and it will take 2 hours. That's the worst case. Normally, as soon as you have one scan, you will go with the cache. In the cache, the kind of thing that we do is we take the result from the analysis of ORT, and we populate now a scan result with the SHA-1 hash of all of the files on the repo. Why do we do this? Because we want to make sure that the files that contain the same hash must contain the same license, right? Because they have not changed. What happens then? Let's see if I can go with the pointer. We fetch basically the cache files, and the ones that we want to keep are the ones that have not changed. So these ones over here, because the license is exactly the same. There were no changes. So then we populate the scan result for now with these ones, right? And after that, we need to run the scan code on everything else that has changed. And that's fine, right? So we fetch all of the files except the ones that we know that have not changed at all. Because we do this on a per pull request basis, you can imagine that the number of files that we need to scan is really small, maybe 10 to 20 files maximum. So the scan time is not too much. We take then the results of the things that did not change and merge them with the things that change and put everything all together so that we have all the licenses. Are we finished? Not quite. We noticed that scan code is a really, really good tool, and I will categorize it a bit as a defensive license compliance. The main reason is that they try to find patterns in the file to detect the license. And this is something that works really good, but sometimes they may miscategorize some licenses. So what we do now as well is we use the reuse tool. All of the Erlang files that we maintain have an SPDX license identifier at the top. Reuse is a software that is going to be able to pick those up quite accurately. For the vendor licenses, we cannot control that. So for those, actually, the scan code is way more better approach, I guess, to scan that there's nothing that enters into Erlang OTP that we don't want to have, right? So given that we use reuse, in case of duplicate of files detected by scan code or reuse, we favor the ones from reuse. And again, those are going to be the ones that Erlang OTP created or have been contributed to Erlang OTP. The vendor ones will 100% of the time, most likely, go with scan code results. Based on that, we get the scan results with all the licenses and so on, and that's what we put in the cache so that they can be used again in a later pull request. Then we run through the ORT report generation, so we generate SPDX 2.2, and we run a custom script that is going to split up the Erlang OTP and the application into different packages and so on. What is the end result? Well, if we go with an example, we have, in this case, the OTP SSH application and some kind of version that we write in the package URL. But we also split things up by test and documentation so that it's easy if someone wants to remove things from the source as well. In this case, for instance, we have the package SSH documentation. And then we create the relations so that that is completely clear. So we have the OTP SSH, which is a package of the OTP project. We have the SSH documentation, which is the documentation of the SSH package. And we also have the SSH tests, which are tests of the OTP SSH test. Erlang applications have also dependencies between them, and we capture them as well. So OTP SSH depends on the runtime system. OTP SSH depends on the kernel library, standard library, and crypto. For vendor libraries, we provide as much information as we can. In case of not knowing exactly what kind of package URL we can put, we can default to generic. I know setlib has been fixed so that it points to the GitHub repo, but in case of others, then maybe we need to use generic. All of this led to be able to claim that Erlang OTP is OpenChain compliant. Of course, there are way more things that one needs to do behind the scenes to be OpenChain compliant, but from the point of view of using ORT, this really led us to be able to announce it. Now let's see what's the path in this case for using ORT in the Elixir programming language. So Elixir is a programming language that runs on top of the Erlang virtual machine. It is a bit smaller, so 1,000 something files. And in 2024, if I recall correctly, the only information they had for the licenses, let's go to the previous, was that these files are Apache under Ericsson copyright, and everything else is Plataforma Tech and the Elixir team. Of course, one can do better than this, right? So that's why the Erlang Foundation thought that we needed to invest into adding SPDX license identifiers to all the files and so on, and that's what we did. What do we end up then, or how do we make sure that we do license compliance and so on? Well, after adding the SPDX license identifiers, we just, for Elixir, we just run the OS Review Toolkit GitHub action. We run the analyzer, the scanner, advisor, evaluator, and the reporter, and generate reports in Cyclone and SPDX. When I said that we were going to look at how the advisor or the compliant rules work, I'm going to show an example because I think it's really simple. In the case of Elixir, they accept anything that is Apache 2.0. They had to add these licenses so that when they analyze for license compliance, the repo, the Elixir logo has these two, and the Unicode for the Unicode files. And of course, the developer certificate, I think it is. What this means is that as long as any of the files that you contribute contain any of these, that's fine. In reality, what it means is that basically, if you contribute to Elixir, you need to produce something that is Apache 2.0. And if not, then you need to talk to Josep Alim and give him a good reason to add any other license. But as you can see, really, it's really simple to say what is really allowed using ORT. The way in which they generate the SPDX report is a bit different than for Erlang, since the project is, I think it's been running close to 10 years probably, but it has 1,000 files, so not 10 or 11,000. They decided to go with a different approach. In this case, you can pass to ORT a structure file, I would say, for this PDX. So this is not the output of the ORT tool. This is what you can feed into ORT. And in this case, they say that, yeah, we're going to have a SPDX file, right? The document that it describes is the Elixir project. And we're going to have different packages. And then you go and specify the packages that you want to have. In this case, the whole project, right? And then some other packages, in this case, for instance, the tool EEX, that lives under this path over there, right? And based on this structure, ORT is going to generate SPDX that contains these packages. Because Erlang and Elixir are written in different project structure, in Erlang we had to add a custom script to detect the test files, documentation, and so on. But for Elixir, after talking to Joseph Alem and the others, they thought that this is exactly what they wanted, so we keep it this way, and it's a bit simpler also to maintain. Well, given all of this, again, we've done the license compliance, vulnerability scanning, and all of this led to be able to claim that Elixir is OpenChain compliant. And again, together with some other requirements that do not really apply to ORT. Where does the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation and ORT look at the future? Let's see. From the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, I think ORT works great in scanning, license compliance, and report generation. The only reason why we cannot recommend to our community yet to use ORT is because the dependencies of the 3 different package managers that we have in the community are not going to be downloaded, so are not going to be scanned. And that's why we think it's been really successful for Elixir and Erlang OTP to use ORT. But if we were to recommend it to people that build apps and have the use of package managers, then the only thing you could do is to analyze your current repository without downloading the dependencies. That's already quite good, but you need to figure out a way to analyze the dependencies. It could be maybe just that you download those and run again ORT manually. So then there you go. From the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, we kind of look forward to see if ORT accepts SBOMs as first-class input, because we already have applications or libraries that generate an SBOM. And if they were to accept an SBOM as first-class input, then we could basically immediately start recommending ORT because it has everything that it needs and it's a great tool. The other way to go around this is to, from the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, invest in integrating the 3 different package managers into ORT. This is something that we are discussing, so we haven't really ruled out. The issue is that it's going to require way more maintenance, I think, for the OS review toolkit and also for the Beam community. And again, we have 3 different package managers, so it's not like you just write one and get it going, right? So we haven't ruled it out, but we don't know exactly if it's best to go for SBOM as first class or invest in adding the 3 package managers. So that's, I think, where we are. And of course, we wouldn't be here without all the support from the community. And this is the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, Ericsson OSPO Office, the Elixir people, OS Review, Reuse, and all of the projects that I've mentioned here. So without them, we couldn't have done this, basically. And now if anyone has any questions, my name is Kiko, and I'm member of the Erlang OTP team and also board member of the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, your presentation was great. I actually got comments, including on our Chinese WeChat, that people like the kind of once upon a time opening. It was really clear. And we do have a question to start off. Yari had a question to open. You mentioned enhancements to ORT. And Yari wanted to know when these enhancements were done. So, what year they were done and so on. So he just wanted to understand when that happened.
Well, since we did, we were able to claim OpenChain compliance in February 2025. I think this was done between in the last 1 year, because we're in June. So yeah, probably in 2024, I think probably around August, we started to talk to the OS Review Toolkit people and add the necessary changes that they accepted. Yeah.
That is really good to know. And When it comes to tracking the changes like that, should we see how you did it by checking out your mailing list, or where should we look if people wanted to see how a community gets that done?
Yeah, if you want to check the changes that we did to the ORT project, I guess you can go to the ORT repository and look for pull requests on my name. I think there are two of them, and then you can really be sure that those are the contributions.
Thank you very much. Alrighty. Um, oh, Thomas put the the
Yeah,
pull
exactly.
request in the chat already. So what I'll do just for fun is I'll show it on the screen so you can see that that's here on the repo. I'll make sure that that pull request also goes into the publishing of this webinar so people can check it out. Right. Continuing our little question segment, does anyone else have any questions you can ask by unmuting or directly in the chat? While we're giving people a moment to think, I do have a question. You seem to have a cautious process in the organization for implementing things, recommending things, and so on. I'm guessing this is born out of partially the original culture where Erlang came from. Areas like Telco are, of course, uh, famous for having a regulatory heavy environment and natural caution. But I wanted to ask, when it came to running an open source project, when it came to running an open source foundation, was there any balance between having a cautious approach to things, but also getting community engagement? Were they contradicting each other or were they actually complementary?
Um, I guess that's a really good question. From the Erlang Foundation, we rely on the work groups um, to see what tool basically they would recommend and is ready. And that's why we've produced, for instance, different work groups have produced guidelines about things, right? And I think if there's a lot of debate, then maybe we still need to have a discussion so that mostly everyone agrees. But I think it's a bit difficult to pinpoint exactly when can one claim that something is used by everyone, right, or can be used by everyone.
Totally understand. And honestly, it was a leading question. We're very similar to you. Our,
Mm.
our work groups sort of determine our direction and they get things and they say it's mature, and then our governing board basically has a look at how they did it. Thomas, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Yeah, maybe I should add a remark as basically being one of the ORT maintainers.
Yep.
Um, so to give some context, so yeah, we love working with the Erlang Foundation. We've been going on and off on trying else because for us it's very useful to have a foundation player basically to adopt ORT, and every time we get new challenges rise up. So we've made several improvements in ORT because of what Kiko's questions were, and not only Kiko, also Jonathan. We helped them on board, and they have always questions. The tricky thing for us is always like, yeah, finding the capacity to do things, and especially with some of I know what's on Kiko's wish list, like SBOM's input as a first input. Again, technically everything is possible, but yeah, the biggest problem on our side is kind of finding the contribution capacity to basically build things, especially if you look at like SBOMs as a first class input. This is one topic that most people often don't understand because they're like, oh, you just want to support CycloneDX or SPDX and it's done. The problem that we are running into is not that it's the standard that we have to parse. The standard is kind of like an envelope, and different SBOM tools produce different outputs. And that makes it really, really problematic. because the way how kind of the reality in code is encoded into an SBOM, that you take 6 different SBOM tools, you get 6 different SBOMs, and that's really problematic for us. Plus, combined that we need for ORT to function, it's not only that how it's encoded, but the data also needs to be basically complete. And this is where maybe something like the God, I know chain it was remembered, but like the OpenChain telco guides. I hope I got the name right.
The Telco SBOM guide, which does quality, and we're now looking at a cross-industry, cross-format expansion to the guide as well.
Yeah, so that's basically where we're hoping that OpenChain can drive that lead, so we get more standardization in the kind of like relative codes. So I know the telco guide is mostly on getting the right fields there, which is a great step forwards. But if you look at it from a tool creator, as that the big thing what we now want to do to accept SBOMs is you kind of need to what we call like creations in ORT speak, but basically think of as correcting the data. Because ORT tries to resolve everything to source code, because once you have source code, you can do license and compliance check, you can do security checks, you can do business continuity things. And that is the biggest problem. Basically, most SBOMs are either structured in a weird way or they miss just quality data, and then we have to patch it up. So that's what most people that are using ORT and importing SBOMs said. It's not technically impossible, but most of the time they write their own Python, Ruby, whatever glue code script of their own to basically patch up what they get from the SBOM tools, so it can be ingested by ORT and processed. It's kind of a shame, but I said the biggest problem is for automation to work, you need standards, and the standards they basically are not there yet.
Hopefully, OpenChain will help with the SBOM quality guide. The telco one already has a validator, kindly released by Nokia, which allows people to quickly check, is this valid against the telco guide? And I do hope that will contribute in the future, and integration with tools will be simplified. Yeah, that's an endless question, isn't it? You have a format. What have you done with the format? What's inside this?
Yeah, but there's also like more contributions. Is that like we know a lot of companies built on top of like scan code, ORT, and other stuff. Unfortunately, very few of them contribute back because they think like, oh, it's not useful or it's highly spoke to us. Like, this is why we love working, as said, with Kiko and Airline Flash, because they're very open. As like, even if you can't contribute to code, try to contribute to code. So like that's how ORT basically got its start, because various OpenChain members, well, they're now all of them OpenChain members, basically couldn't contribute to code, but at least gave us a sneak peek on how they solved problems, and also some of them basically contributed developers to basically help us understand problems. Because again, compliance is really, really complicated, and there are multiple ways to Rome. And the better we understand the use cases of particular organizations, the better the open source tooling can be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I do hope that one of the outcomes of talks like this and sharing our community work is that more people are encouraged to help out the community. And Kiko, you mentioned something. You mentioned the positive of integration between tools. So you mentioned ORT and scan code. So it seems that if we want an example of why it's good to work together, why it's good to contribute, that seemed to be one item for you. That was a helpful thing.
Yeah, definitely.
One question I have related to that, are there other tools, integrations, and so on that might be useful for you in the future? Now, this is practically a hypothetical, but it's just, has stuff come to mind where you thought, oh, I would like that. This would help me.
It's a bit tricky. I mean, in our ecosystem, we Jonathan, the Chief Information Security Officer of the Ecosystem Foundation, has put together a project to deal with security inside our ecosystem. And it contains quite a bunch of things that we would like. But if we talk basically outside, it becomes a bit more complex. But most of them are really about how to ensure the security of our package manager. In this case, it's called Hex. We host the source code for the projects and so on, right? And how to ensure that things are safe. And there's a bunch of steps that one needs to take, right? I guess the best thing I can do is to recommend people to visit the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation security group website under project Aegis and go and see the kind of things that could be useful for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll just check if anyone has any final question, because we have time for up to one more question. Right. In that case, I think the thing to do is to say thank you very much indeed, Kiko, for making time today and for contributing. We really appreciate everything you've done. And we'll be posting this webinar soon. So thank you and have a beautiful day.
Yeah, thank you so much.